Workmen were digging a trench on a vacant block in Joel Street, Ringwood North, when part of the foundation collapsed, trapping 23-year-old Bruce Capaldo. Smoke from a nearby burn-off made rescue attempts by fellow workmates unsuccessful. When ambulance officers arrived at the scene, the injured man had been trapped with serious leg injuries for more than an hour. Then, without warning, another cave-in, and 2 ambulance officers attempting to free the man were trapped by large sections of earth.
Bruce, let that bucket down! Let go the cable down! Let go the cable! Let go!
The officers assured rescue workers that they were not seriously injured, and in a matter of minutes, all 3 were safe. They were taken to the Box Hill Hospital, and according to doctors there, one of the ambulance officers has suffered a broken arm.
It's always a tragedy when an accident like this occurs. But what happens afterwards? We're less concerned here with how the accident occurred or could have been prevented. In this video, we're more concerned with what happens afterwards. After most work-related injuries, the best solution for everyone concerned is for the worker to get back on the job as soon as possible. But who helps rehabilitate the worker and get him back to work? And what of the human and financial cost to the worker and the employer? Most of us feel bad at the time an accident occurs, but once the worker leaves the site, we still have to get on with the job, and the injured person essentially becomes out of sight, out of mind. We're going to study 3 cases where workers have suffered different types of injuries and ask you to participate in discussion about helping them return to work. The first case involves Sam, who has injured her left wrist, in this case her non-dominant hand. Sam is a qualified carpenter in a medium-sized joinery with 6 employees, including the owner and his wife. Sam is also responsible for supervising one of the apprentices. Sam, how did you injure your wrist?
Well, Jason the apprentice and me were unloading some timber from the truck, and Jason got a splinter in his hand because the silly bugger wasn't wearing any gloves, and he dropped the load. I copped the full weight and lost my balance, and the timber smashed down on top of my wrist. I knew straight away that it was broken because it was so painful and I couldn't move my fingers. So the boss's wife, Stella, drove me to the hospital, and they x-rayed it and put it in plaster, while Stella did the paperwork at the admission desk.
So what was your boss's reaction?
Oh, George was flat out as usual. So Stella drove me home. The next day she brought around my wages and told me that George had said I shouldn't worry, he'd see me right till I could come back to work.
Yeah. And what about your work care claim? When was it put in?
Well, it wasn't at first. They were just giving me sick leave. It wasn't until I went around to my local doctor about a week later that I was told how to make a claim. George is a nice guy, but in a way he was ripping me off.
Yes, I got it here. Yep, no problem. I'll fix it. Okay, bye-bye.
George, there seems to be some confusion about the work care claim. What happened?
Well, you see, she didn't ask, and it is the first time that we have an injury, and nobody knows what to do. So, you know, I'm a very busy man. I'm working. I got a business to look after, and I haven't got time for these things. But we work it out. You know, it's all okay now.
Yeah, I suppose we were both pretty inexperienced. I'd never been injured before. George had never had a claim before. I filled out a claim form and George sent it off to the claims administration agent. It was all ridgy-ditch. George accepted liability and the claim went through okay. George had to pay the first 5 days' wages and the medical expenses, which have been about $120 so far. There's a limit to the amount that he has to pay for medical expenses. If it goes over that limit, then Work Care pays the rest of the medical bills. But it all worked out okay and I got my sick leave benefits back. Now George has got a sign displayed at work that tells everyone how to make a work care claim.
How are you managing at home? I suppose you're enjoying a good rest.
Are you kidding? The doctor said I'd be off for quite a few weeks, but I've only lasted 2 weeks at home so far and I'm going stir crazy. It's boring. I want to get back to work. I rang my doctor and she said it would be okay to do clerical work or cleaning up and stuff. Just so long as I didn't put any strain on my broken wrist. So I turned up at work the next day and George just went off his rocker and sent me home.
Come on, she's got a busted wrist. I can't have her back until she's fit. I mean, she could have another accident. Or even worse, she could cause an accident with someone else. And then I'd really be in the shit with work care.
She could do other duties or modify duties until she's better.
Well, the public service, I haven't got any light duties.
Not light duties, modified duties.
Light, modified, what's the difference anyway? The union wouldn't let it happen.
Well, you're obviously not doing carpentry work. What's happened?
After George sent me home, I went back to my doctor. She sent me off to a rehabilitation provider. I was only going to be in plaster for another 4 to 6 weeks, but I needed to strengthen my wrist then before I could go back to the workshop. Paul, the guy from rehab, had a talk with George and found out that Stella was snowed under with bookwork and could use some help in the office for a few weeks. So we sorted out a temporary work arrangement and here I am. It's good experience for me because I get to learn how the office works, and I did some simple job estimating for George. It was sort of like getting more qualifications. Now I'm even more useful to them at work.
Hey, Sam. Listen, thanks very much for all that work you do on that estimate, huh? It looks like we soon get another job.
George was wrapped. He paid me as a clerk during the alternative duties in the office, and work care paid a portion of the difference between that pay and what I usually get, and George made up the extra. Everybody seemed to win. I got back to work, I didn't lose any pay or benefits, and George and Stella got the office work sorted out, generated more business, and saved money.
But what did the union say?
Well, we chatted with them and they didn't have a problem with it. It's just a small business. We all seem to work pretty well together and everyone came out ahead.
Our second case involves a bricklayer, Peter, who has worked for a medium-sized construction company for the past 6 years, but has been a bricklayer since leaving school. Peter has worked hard and has a good knowledge of building construction, but has no additional qualifications. Peter has been away from work for about 6 months on work care with back problems, and is not confident about returning to work in case he aggravates the complaint. So, Peter, when did you first realise that something was wrong with your back?
Oh, it was real sudden. I mean, one day I'm at work, bending, okay, and the next minute I can't straighten up. The pain in my back, incredible. I had to go home.
Well, what happened?
Well, I took a bit of time off, and I naturally went and saw a doctor. He sent me to get some x-rays. Well, they showed that the disc spaces in my lower back were narrowed, and one of the discs was damaged. Sometimes my back just aches. Like, when I bend, it pinches a nerve, and I get dreadful pains in my lower back, shooting pains down my legs. And sometimes when I bend, I can't get up again.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you know, I've got to use a wall or a rail or something to sort of pull myself up, straighten myself up. Yeah.
Do you know what caused the condition?
No, I don't know. I suppose it's just part of being a brickie, isn't it? That's my line of work. It's all the bending, you know, you're twisting all the time and you're lifting, and yeah, I suppose most workers have got some sort of injury, you know, just part of the job.
Have you been back to the site to pick up your pay?
Yeah.
And what does the supervisor say?
Oh, you know, he reckons I'm putting it on. You know, since I've been off, he reckons he's seen me down the local supermarket, lifting boxes of groceries, and you know, I'm a family man, you know. We've still got to eat.
Yeah.
You know, I'm bloody sure he doesn't experience the kind of pain and discomfort I do, you know, when I lift anything. You know, I reckon the worst thing is the shit the guys at work put on me. They can't see anything wrong with my back, and so they make up jokes about Shagger's back and stuff. No, nobody really understands, mate. You know, I just think that they don't care. They don't understand it. Well, you know, I really want to get back to work. You know, I reckon I could do anything different to better brickies. They just took me a little more seriously and, didn't laugh at me.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it would help.
Okay, if you take these down to the office and just let them know what's going.
Excuse me, David, you're the job steward here and you've worked with Peter for some time, haven't you?
That's right.
Peter's having a few problems at the moment, isn't he?
Yeah, a lot of the blokes sling off at Peter about his back.
And why is that?
I suppose a common attitude in the industry is that most of the guys with crook backs put it on.
And what do you think?
Well, I'm sure some people do, but I know Peter and I don't think he'd put it on. He's been off to the doctors and physiotherapy. I think he's doing everything he can to get his back right again, but I think he's a bit scared that he might do some permanent damage to his back if he starts bricklaying again. That's probably part of the problem with his back pain now.
So what do you think could be done to help get Peter back to work?
Well, just talking to the doctors for starters would be a help. I suppose finding out exactly what he can and can't do. But everyone around here seems too busy to do that. They could also have a workplace assessment done. You know, finding out what they can change around the workplace so that Peter and everyone else for that matter can continue working without risk of further injury.
But what if Peter really can't do bricklaying anymore?
Well, they could easily retrain him to be a supervisor. He's been in the industry 16 years. He's got a good knowledge of building practices, and this organisation's really short of supervisors at the moment.
Are there other modified duties that he could do?
Yeah, the building sites are often looking for gophers who'll go out and get all those little things that they need in a hurry. Or with some simple retraining, he could work in the office, controlling the materials ordering. And on some of the larger jobs, he could become involved in some program planning. Or they could make him a full-time safety officer. There's lots of possibilities.
So he could be back at work quite soon?
Given that he received a little support and planning, but this company's too busy being busy. The silly buggers don't realise that the longer Peter's off work, the more it's going to cost them in make-up pay and higher work care premiums. If they had half a brain, they'd be getting him back and gradually reintroducing him to the work. I'm sure he could manage at one job or another. He just needs a little time and understanding. The company simply has to do some planning.
What will the union's attitude be?
Well, that all depends on how it's handled. If the organisation comes up with a clear plan and involves the unions in discussions, I don't think there'll be too many problems.
And if they don't find a solution?
It's not just a solution for Peter. It's much broader than that. This guy's got 16 years' experience. The industry can't afford to lose people like that. If they don't come up with a solution, it's just plain crazy. And if they try and give him the sack or they don't come up with a realistic alternative, then there's no way of telling what will happen.
Our third case involves Brian, a subcontractor carpenter who's been off work for 12 months after a serious fall. Brian was working on the roof framing of this house at the time of his accident.
Well, I don't know exactly how I fell. I must have slipped, it happened so fast. I hit that ledge there, then hit the ground. I smashed 3 vertebrae in my back and damaged my spinal cord. I'm bloody lucky I wasn't crippled for good.
What sort of treatment have you been having?
Well, I spent 7 weeks in hospital resting so the vertebrae could heal, but they didn't. My foot went funny. Drop foot, they call it. Then they figured my spinal nerves were affected and I had to have an operation to fuse the 3 vertebrae together, you know, so they could settle down and heal. Then I spent 4 months in the rehab hospital.
Well, it's been 12 months since the accident. How are things now?
Well, I'm getting better, but I've got a bit of a way to go yet. Sometimes I get real depressed, you know. I just mope around the house feeling restless and, well, sort of useless, because I'm not pulling me weight. The wife's pretty understanding, but I know sometimes I'm given to the irrits. When I was working, my life seemed to have a purpose. Now it's just, well, nothing. And I'm edgy. looking for something to do all the time. It's just not like me to sit around and do nothing. Well, I still have a fair bit of pain and I can't stand for long periods. I can walk okay, although not up steep hills. And climbing's out and I can't lift anything heavy either. I still use a stick to walk with, but I won't need that much longer. The rehab hospital gave me some physio and some gym work to help me get my flexibility back. It's taken a while, but I'm getting there.
Have you made any plans for the future?
Well, I went to vocational counselling and the guy helped me think a lot of things through.
So what are you going to do? Can't your employer give you modified duties?
Well, I'm not too sure at the moment. Look, it helps me if I move around a bit. The contractor that I subbed for wants to help me get back to work, but he's too small to have modified work, and I sure can't go climbing over roof frames again. So, I reckon I'm stuffed as a chippy. The vocational counsellor and I came up with a few things. I could teach in a trade school, but I don't think that'd suit me real well. Or I could retrain as a safety officer on a construction site. I can read plans, and I've got a pretty good knowledge of the construction industry. Do you know I was a bloody good chippy before the accident? I can still use a hammer, just can't climb on a roof. But with a bit of training, I reckon I could work pretty well as a construction foreman on small works. But I don't think I'd feel comfortable being a manager.
So have you decided anything definite?
Well, I reckon I might move into estimating. I'm pretty good with figures, and it'd be a good chance to stay in the building game. Heaps better than going nuts and getting in the wife's way at home and feeling useless.
So the future's looking all right?
Yeah, I'd say so. If you'd asked me how things were 6 months ago, I think I'd have cried and told you to get stuffed. Now, I think I've got a chance. It's looking better.
Experienced tradespeople are a valuable resource. It's good business sense to protect and make best use of the investment made in their training. Fears and anxieties about returning to work often go hand in hand with work injuries. The longer a worker remains off work, the more difficult a return to work becomes. This means increased costs to the employer. As our 3 case studies show, there are many solutions to the problems of returning injured workers to work, and many time and cost-saving advantages to the employer who meets this challenge intelligently. Don't let your injured workers become out of sight, out of mind. Sam has now returned to her carpenter's job. By assisting Sam to return to work early, WorkCare saved over $1,500, and George, her employer, saved $281 in employer's liabilities and obtained new contracts valued at more than $17,000. Peter's employer organised a rehabilitation program for him. WorkCare paid for his training as a supervisor. Peter now works as a construction foreman with the same company. Through WorkCare, Brian was helped to find a job as a purchasing officer. WorkCare paid for him to complete a short training course and for modifications to his workplace to help him return to work.